grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Consumer Studies revision lesson. My name is Lillian Dube, and this lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Phakama Research and Development. Grade 12s, today our topic is on the consumer. So it's a revision lesson on the topic, the consumer. And then we want to go to the objectives for today's lesson. We should be able to revise questions from past exam papers on the topics, financial and contractual issues, as well as taxes, interest rates, and inflation. Right, learners, we have already covered these topics, that is financial and contractual issues, as well as taxes, interest rates, and inflation, right? We will start with the short questions first, that is multiple choice questions. So remember to read and understand the questions and also follow the instructions, right? Our number one says, various options are provided as possible answers to the following questions. Choose the correct answer and only write the letter A to D next to the question number, right? So our 1.1 says, identify the cause of inflation. Our A says, increase in interest rate. B, increase in the purchasing power of money. C, value of the rand strengthens over other currencies. And D, decrease in the price of petrol. Right, let's answer number one, and then we can go to our 1.2. Right, we move on to question 1.2 says, compound interest is A, financial profit made on shares. B, interest earned on multiple savings accounts. C, money earned on capital investment. D, interest calculated on the principal amount plus interest earned. Right, that's our 1.2. Let's answer that one and we move on. Right, we move to 1.3. 1.3 says, estate duty is a type of tax payable. A, after someone has died. B, on earnings above 60,000. C, on consumer goods. And D, after the sale of a house. Right, can we answer that one? Then we can move to the next one. We move on to question 1.4 says, the percentage increase in the price of goods and services is A, value added tax. B, inflation rate. C, pay as you earn. And D, interest rate. Right, answer 1.4, then we can continue. Let's go to 1.5 says, changes measured in the average price of goods bought for a household is there. A, time value of money. B, new income tax systems. C, national credit regulator. And D, consumer price index. Right, Just answer that one and then we can move to the next one. Right, we go on to 1.6 says the South African Revenue Service A approves products of high quality, B determines the inflation rate, C receives and hands over tax money, and D regulates monetary issues. Answer 1.6, then we can move on to 1.7. Right, 1.7 says the repo rate is the interest charged by A, furniture stores, B, the National Credit Regulator, C, banks for home loans, and D, the Reserve Bank. Right, answer 1.7. We move on to the next one is 1.8 says the dash is the interest rate that is charged by commercial banks. A, interest rate, B, inflation rate, C, prime interest rate, and D, repo rate. Right, answer 1.8, and then we can move on. And then we go on to 1.9 says A or N allows a consumer to cancel a contract without any financial implications. That is A, verbal agreement, B, cooling off period, C, exemption clause, and D, fair business practice. Right, answer 1.9, and then we go to the last one, which is 1.10. Right, 1.10 says a written promise to repair or replace an article if it breaks is called A, an extended guarantee, B, a contract, C, a warranty, and D, insurance. Right, let's answer 1.10 and then we can go to the answers of the solutions to our questions. Right, we're done. Let's go to the answers for our multiple choice questions. We go back to number 1. We answer together. 1 says, identify the cause of inflation. So the cause of inflation is the increase in interest rates. The increase in interest rates causes inflation. So our answer there is A. Right, let's mark together and go to 1.2. Compound interest is. So compound interest is interest that is calculated on the principal amount plus the interest earned. So our answer there is D. Right, we move on to 1.3 says estate duty is the type of tax payable. Our answer is A, after someone has died. So we call that the deceased estate. The deceased estate. So our answer is A. Right, and then 1.3 says, we got 1.4 says the percentage increase in the price of goods and services is. we call that the inflation rate. So 1.4, the answer is B. Let's move on to 1.5 says changes measured in the average price of goods bought for a household is there. It's called the Consumer Price Index. We abbreviate it as CPI. So our answer there is D, Consumer Price Index. Right? And then 1.6 says the South African Revenue Service. What does it do? It receives and hands over tax money. So our answer is C there. So South African Revenue Services is SARS, right? They receive and hand over tax money. Right, let's go to 1.7 says the repo rate is the interest charged by, right? The repo rate is charged by the Reserve Bank. So our answer there is D. The repo rate is charged by the Reserve Bank, right? And then let's go on to 1.8 says the dash is the interest rate that is charged by commercial banks, right? So our answer there is C, which is the prime interest rate. So remember, there is two types of interest. We've got the repo rate and the prime interest rate. The repo rate is charged by the Reserve Bank, and the repo rate apparently affects the prime interest rate, which is charged by the commercial banks. So if the repo rate rises, it means the prime interest rate will also rise. If the repo rate is reduced, then the commercial banks will also do what? They will reduce their prime interest rate. Right, let's move on to 1.9 says A or N allows a consumer to cancel a contract without any financial implications, right? So we call that the cooling off period. I'm sure you still remember, learners. The cooling off period allows 5 working days for a consumer to cancel a contract, right? Without any financial implications or explanations. So this is the type of contract that is initiated through direct marketing. Direct marketing is when a seller approaches you through a telephone call that is directly, or they send you an email or a message. So once you take a contract through direct, which is done directly, we are allowed 5 working days, which is called the cooling off period. Right, let's go on to 1.10 says a written promise to repair or replace an article if it breaks is called a warranty. So our answer for 1.10 is C, which is a warranty. Right, we are done with our multiple choice questions. I hope you got everything correct since we have already covered these topics. Right, let's move on to the next question, which is 1.2. It says match the term in column B with the description in column A. So our column is on the next slide. We are just supposed to match the term that is in column B with the description in column A. Right, let's move on. There is the column description, which is A, and then column B, which is the term. So our 1.2.1 reads repayments are not affected if the interest rates rise or fall. Right? That's our description. 1.2.1. Then point 2 says the money borrowed from the bank to buy home. Right? And 1.2.3 says an additional source that can be used as security if the loan does not cover the full purchase amount. And then 1.2.4 says interest is paid if there is a delay in the registration process of the mortgage. Right? 1.2.5 says an agreement between the owner and the tenant for occupation of property against payment of rent. Right? Those are the descriptions, and then the terms. We've got A, flexi interest rates, B, interim interest rates, C, property rates, D, collateral security, E, bond, F, fixed interest rate, and G is a lease. Right? I'll give you a few minutes to match, and then we can go to the solutions for our question. Right, I'm hoping we are done with the matching. Let's go on to the answers. Right, so 1.2.1 is repayments are not affected if the interest rates rise or fall. So our matching answer there is F. So F is fixed interest rates. That is, if interest rates are fixed, they do not change, they remain the same, despite the fact that interest rates would rise or they would fall. So they still remain, or you still remain paying a fixed amount. Right? And then the money borrowed from the bank to buy a home. Right? Our matching letter there is E. Let's see what is E. E is bond, right? So the money that you borrow from the bank to buy a home is called a bond. It means your house is bonded until you finish paying off the money to the bank, right? And then 1.2.3 says an additional source that can be used as security if the loan does not cover the full purchase amount. So our matching letter there is D, and what is D is collateral security. So you have to provide the bank with collateral security when you need a loan from the bank. Sometimes if you are purchasing a second house and you have the first house, you would use your first house as collateral security. Collateral security is something that the banks or the bank hold on to, so that in case you fail to pay back the loan that you've borrowed, they would go back and sell that property so that they can recover their money back. Right? And then 1.2.4 says interest is paid if there is a delay in the restoration process of the mortgage. So our answer there is B. It's called interim interest rates. Right? And 1.2.5 says an agreement between the owner and tenant for the occupation of property against payment of rent. Right? I'm sure next year most of you will be renting. When you go to university, you'd need to rent somewhere because the university will be a bit further from your home. So what is it that you sign when you occupy somebody's property? So our answer there is G. You sign a lease agreement so that the landlord doesn't have the right to just throw you away anytime they want to. They have to stick to the lease that you have signed. Right, learners? I hope you got everything correct. Let's move to our next question. That's 1.3 says, give one word for each of the following descriptions below. 3.1 says, additional expenses included in the running of the business. And then point 3 says, tax payable after someone's death. And then point 3 says, indirect tax payable on alcohol and cigarettes. And then point 4, a community-based savings club. And 5, the fund from which an unemployed worker can claim if he lost his job. Right, I'll give you just a few minutes to answer that, and then we can go to the solution. Right, they're only supposed to give one word. I'm sure we are almost done. Let's move on to the solutions. Right? 1.3.1, we said an additional expenses included in the running of the business. We call these overhead. Right? That's our answer. And point 2 says tax payable after someone's death. We had already covered that. We said it's called estate duty. That is a deceased estate. And then point 3, indirect tax payable on alcohol and cigarettes. We call it sin tax. It's called sin tax, or sometimes we call it excise duty. Sin tax or excise duty. I'm sure it will be easier for you to remember sin tax. Right? And then a community-based savings club is called a stokvel. Right? And then the fund from which an unemployed worker can claim if he lost his job, his or her job, we call it the unemployment insurance fund. Sometimes it's written as UIF. So all the people that are working have got UIF being deducted from their salaries. In case they lose their jobs, then they can claim the UIF fund, right? I hope we got everything correct. Let's move on to the next question. Right, we got 1.4 says, with the inflation rate constantly changing, young adults find it difficult to remain within the limits of their budget when buying clothes and accessories for the world of work. So very soon you would need to buy clothes. That's if you manage to work, you need to buy clothes that are decent, that can give you a good representation of the company that you are working for, right? So 1.4.1 says, explain the terms inflation rate. And B says, consumer price index. So I'll give you a few minutes to explain the terms inflation rate and consumer price index. Right, I hope we are done. Let's move on to our answers. Right, the first one is inflation rate. So inflation is the way in which economists measure how prices of items are changing over a period of time. That is the increase or the decrease of prices of goods and services over a period of time. Or we can say inflation is when the prices of goods and services keep going up or they keep rising, whilst our salaries still remain the same. So it means we end up drowning in our budgets. It means your budget doesn't match the amount of money that you are earning, right? So that's inflation. And then we go on to consumer price index. So the consumer price index measures the average change in prices of goods and services over a period of time. So the CPI is used to calculate the rate of inflation over a period of time. So they actually check how much, or they check on the price increases of goods that we mostly use, that we mostly buy, and they see how much people are buying or how much they have reduced on what they are supposed to be buying. So as long as there is inflation, we find ourselves cutting on the essentials that we need. We look at our budget and cut down on some of the things because our salaries no longer match the price increase of the goods and services that we are using. Right? Let's move on to the next question. Is 1.5 says, read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Right, learners, I will read the scenario to you. It says, an employer was charged for allegedly calling his employee foul names. The magistrate asked the employee why the matter was brought before the court, as there were other procedures to follow. Right? So they called each other foul names to an extent that they ended up taking each other to the court. So our question 1.5.1 says, name the procedure that the employee could have followed to resolve the situation without going to court. So next year again, you guys will be working, and in case you face problems with your employer, then you must know which procedures you must take. So we want to look at the procedure that the employee could have followed to resolve the situation without going to court. Going to court is a huge process because there's certain procedures that you have to follow, and it means money from your pocket. Right? Let's answer 1.5.1 and then we can move on to the solution. Right? I'm hoping you've written down the answer. Let's go on to our answer and see. It says, name the procedure that the employee could have followed to resolve the situation without going to court. So the employee was supposed to refer to the company's code of conduct. So every company has a code of conduct which shows you what procedure you should take or whom you should go to when you have a certain problem. So you must refer to the code of conduct first without rushing to go to court, right? So you are supposed to lodge the complaint to the employer. Also, this employee was supposed to talk to the employer or complain to the employer first and tell them that they were not happy with whatever happened. And then the other one, they could consult the labor union which they are affiliated to. So as long as you are working, you need to be affiliated, or you need to belong to a labor union that would fight for you in case of such problems, right? And then they can also seek arbitration if the matter is not resolved, right? And then also disciplinary hearing at work could be held. I'm sure there was somebody else they could communicate with, that is their immediate supervisor, who could carry out a disciplinary hearing instead of going to court. So those are our answers for 5.1. Right, let's move on to the next question. 1.6 says, read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. I'll also read the scenario to you, learners. Right? It says, Ayanda was approached by a sales representative of a company to install an alarm system at her house. The sales representative was so convincing about the safety that she could not resist signing the contract immediately. After recalculating her budget, 3 days after signing the contract, she realized that she could not really afford it. She called the manager to cancel the contract before the alarm system would be installed. So before we go to the questions, let's look at this scenario. It says Ayanda was approached by a sales representative. So this is what we call, learners, direct marketing. That is direct marketing. So direct marketing is when sales representatives approach you physically through a telephone call or through an email or an SMS, and then you decide to do what? To sign a contract with them. So that is direct marketing. So our question is 1.6.1 says, explain the term contract. And 1.6.2 says, explain how the cooling off period protected Ayanda when she cancelled the alarm system contract. Right, I want you to answer the two questions. Remember, we said the cooling off period is when a customer is given 5 working days to cancel a contract that is initiated through direct marketing without any financial implications. Right. So let's answer the two questions and then we can go to the solutions. Right, let's go to the solutions. Hoping we are done. 1.6.1 says, explain the term contract. So a contract is the legal agreement between 2 or more people. It says only 2 people, so let's put 2 or more people. It could be 2, 3, 4 or more, right? Where one party promises to do something in return for a valuable benefit of some sort. So that benefit could be money, they could exchange money, or they can do it in exchange of services, or they can do it in exchange of food. So that is a contract. As long as 2 people have agreed, it becomes legal in the court of law. or after they both have both signed, then it becomes legal in the court of law, or it applies in the court of law, right? And then 1.6.2 says explain how the cooling off period protected Ayanda when she cancelled the alarm system contract, right? So Ayanda was approached through what we call direct marketing. This is a transaction that she did not start herself, but it was started by the what? By the sales representative, right? And then the second point says she has the right to cancel the contract or consider her purchase within 5 business working days without giving a reason, right? So she may not be charged any penalty fees for this cancellation, right? As she cancelled it within the what? Within the cooling off period. So I'm still trying to bring to your attention that the cooling off period is when a consumer is given 5 working days to cancel a contract that is initiated through direct marketing without giving any reason or any financial implications, right? We're done with 1.6.2. Let's go to the next question. 1.7 says, give 2 reasons why people pay provisional tax. And 1.8 says, explain why compound interest is more expensive than simple interest. And our 1.9 says, describe the role that municipalities should play in helping their communities to recover from flood challenges. So of late, we had plenty of rains and some homes were flooded, right? So describe how municipalities should help their communities so that they can recover from the flooding challenges, right? I'll give you a few minutes again to answer the questions, and then we can move on to the solutions. Right, I hope we're done. Let's move on to our answers. We'll start with 1.7 says, give 2 reasons why people pay provisional tax. So for us to answer this question, we need to know what provisional tax is, right? So people who pay provisional tax receive an irregular income. Who receives an irregular income? For example, farmers, right? Farmers do not have a regular income. It comes maybe after the harvesting period. That could take maybe 6 months, or maybe after a year, that is when they harvest. So these are the people that pay provisional tax, right? So that they will not be required to pay a large tax at once, right? Because their harvesting season comes maybe once or twice a year. That's why they pay provisional tax. Also, their income cannot be taxed on monthly basis because it varies and is not guaranteed. Remember, sometimes when there is drought, farmers end up not harvesting anything. So that's why we are saying their income is not guaranteed, right? And then these are the people who receive income from more than one source. These are also some of the people that pay provisional tax, which means they work somewhere and they also maybe have a business running somewhere. So they receive their income from more than one source, right? Let's go on to 1.8 says, explain why compound interest is more expensive than simple interest. So in this case, all we need to do is to explain what compound interest is and also explain what simple interest is. Then we come up with the answer, right? So compound interest is more expensive. Why? Because interest is added on the principal amount, and it is also added to the what? To the interest that is accumulated to date. So that is interest on the principal amount plus the interest that is accumulated. So it becomes more expensive. But when it comes to simple interest, interest is only charged on the principal amount, which makes simple interest a much better option. So as consumers, every time when we buy items, we need to know which type of interest we are being charged. So you need to ask. You have a right to ask as a consumer, which type of interest are we charging on this loan that I am applying for? And they will explain to you that it's either we are charging you compound interest or simple interest. At the same time, we will discover that compound interest is an advantage that if you are investing money. So if we investing money, compound interest would be to your advantage because they would charge it, they would give you interest on the principal amount plus interest on top of interest. Right. Let's move on to our question 1.9 says, describe the role that municipalities should play in helping their communities to recover from flood challenges. Right? Municipalities should provide clean, safe, and fresh water to their communities. They should also fix electrical problems that might have happened during flooding. Remember, when there is flood, we usually have problems with electricity. So they should fix those problems. They should also provide shelter for people who lost their homes in community walls. So people who lose their homes during flooding are sometimes accommodated in churches. They're given food, they're given blankets. That is the local municipality's role. So they are accommodated also in the local churches as well as community halls, also given food and blankets until they find a better accommodation for them. Also, the municipality should repair the infrastructure, such as potholes in their area that might have developed. So when it rains a lot, we tend to experience potholes on our roads within the local communities. So it is the role of the municipality to do what? To make sure they fill up those potholes. Right? I hope you got that one correct. Let's move on again, still on 1.9. Also, the municipalities should also ensure that there is proper sanitation for their communities. Right? They should also clean stormwater drains to prevent more flooding to the streets and the yards. Right? Our drains are blocked because we do not dispose of our waste properly. So are you a responsible community member that does not just throw things away, but should put them in the what? In the dustbins. I know most of us are guilty of that. You drink maybe your bottle of Coca-Cola, you just throw it out there. The next thing, that bottle is washed by the water into the drains, thereby blocking our drains. Right? They should also clear debris or litter after the floods. Again, our municipalities have also got a responsibility to collect our garbage as well. Sometimes if they don't collect the garbage, this also results in people just throwing their garbage anyway. And then that garbage is also washed into the storm drains, thereby blocking the drains and flooding our streets. Right? They must also establish fire and disaster management services to protect and rescue lives. So, fire, we're talking about the local fire brigades, and also disaster management. We've got ambulances that belong to the local municipalities. So, those should be ready to assist the communities to recover from flood challenges. Right? Grade 12, we go to the summary of today's lesson. We said provisional tax is tax that is paid by someone or by people who have an irregular income, like farmers. And we also looked at compound interest, is the interest that is added to the principal amount, and it is also added to the interest accumulated to date. And then we said consumer price index measures the average change in the prices of consumer goods and services over a fixed period of time. And then we say the inflation rate is the way in which economists measure how prices of items are changing over a period of time. Right, learners? We have come to the end of today's revision lesson. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson.